Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Harry Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, and Rydan Investments.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.
Happy you could join us here on a Monday night, on a brighter Monday night. We had more light here today. It was actually light when I left my house to come into the studio here, but we got a good show for you here. We're turning our attention to more varied coverage here. We're still working in some football, but it's time for, it seems weird already, but it's time for pitchers and catchers to report here. So
not weird.
Yeah, well, yeah, Mike's excited about this. We got MLB in the studio, so it's appropriate that we start with MLB here, and I'm hoping he'll join in on the interview as well. I've been waiting for probably about 6 months to get this guy on the show. He may or may not have been bumped by Lance Parrish. We're not going to talk about that, though. We bumped Lance Parrish for him this time, though. Just kidding, Lance, if you're listening. But yeah, this is Brandon Day from Bless You Boys. He's the managing editor. He does a great job there. I read his stuff all the time, tons of information. So we're excited to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, guys. Yeah, don't tell Lance you bumped him for me, for sure.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I don't need that smoke.
Well, it's funny because, yeah, nobody wants to mess with Lance even now. I mean, he still probably lifts weights. He's still pretty fit. I've seen him somewhat recently. But, yeah. What was interesting last year, because we got so many bonus weeks, that was a lot of fun. I was getting ready to basically put a nail in baseball coverage in basically July, and then because that was the point where they had basically a 1% chance to make the playoffs, and then all of a sudden they go on this run. We know how this went, but they gave us a bunch of bonus weeks, and if there was one more week, you were literally the next one. So we're kicking it off. You're our first baseball rep. That's going to be a perfect fit, I think, because they really have had an interesting offseason so far. It's been fun to watch what's happened, because they've done a good job carrying the momentum into this year, it seems.
Yeah, I have to agree. There's obviously the Alex Bregman question, and that's been kind of looming the entire offseason, and we still don't know what's going to happen there. But I think at very least it's encouraging that the Tigers have already done as much as they have, and they're actually still at least in some capacity trying to sign Alex Bregman. I don't know if that's going to happen, but, when Jack Flaherty landed in their lap, I kind of figured that was the end. You start to look at the payroll creeping up to $140 million, $135 million. They haven't spent that much, since probably 2017. And, they're still at least engaged in talks. So that's encouraging. That's encouraging for the future, whatever happens with Alex Bregman. But, the pitching staff obviously looks much improved again with Jack Flaherty and Alex Cobb in the mix. Alex Cobb is kind of a decent fit who, the Tigers don't mind kind of his injury history, because he tends to be effective when he's on the mound. And if he misses time, that's all right, because the Tigers have a lot of good young pitching depth that they want to see this season. And then, you add in Gleyber Torres, which isn't, an earth-shattering move, but it kind of just replaces, kind of the baseline production that you would hope to get from Spencer Torkelson. And whatever happens with Spencer Torkelson, you've got Gleyber Torres in there at second. It doesn't necessarily help the infield defense, but we're going to live with that. And, Colt Keith moving over to first base. Colt Keith had a pretty nice first season, got off to a really rough start in April. I was a big Colt Keith guy as a prospect, and still am. And I think there's a lot more to come in terms of the power department for him in the years ahead. So, people can kind of get caught up a little bit in, okay, first base, is this guy going to hit us 30 home runs? Probably not right away. I could see him getting there eventually. But, the whole group together, I think is just a little bit more well-composed as an offense. And, they weren't a dominant group down the stretch offensively, even after they got Parker Meadows going and, some other help, got Javi out of the lineup and had Trey Sweeney at least, contributing a little bit. But, they're an average offense at least, and they're young. So, there's a lot to be optimistic about on that front. And then the pitching staff was just redonkulous last year. I mean, just like you, we got done with, trading Jack Flaherty, kind of writing up some of that and taking a look at the new prospects. And, we were kind of starting to wind it down. And then, they win the Little League World Series game in dramatic fashion. Parker Meadows hits this crazy home run off for a 101-mile-per-hour fastball against the Padres. to win that game. And, we're still kind of like, I can't believe in this. Like, I can't let myself get hurt. And then, next thing you know, Trey Sweeney's diving over Riley Green, making an incredible play. And all of a sudden we're right there. The Twins are falling apart. And, all of a sudden we're ramping it up too and scrambling, like, okay, this is going to go on a while. And that was a great feeling. It was a lot of fun. It's obviously been a long time. 2014 feels like forever ago. That's right about when I started writing for Bless You Boys. And, here we are with a decent offseason at least, a solid offseason that still gives them a lot of flexibility. And you never know. Maybe they do land Alex Bregman. So I'm not really worried about it at this point, one way or the other. I'd like Alex Bregman, but, we're kind of just going to let that play out at this point.
Yeah, we're all trying to get over our Detroit fandom PTSD here, I feel like, collectively, because we had this with the Lions season, and now you're talking about that with the Tigers, because all the teams are slowly getting better here. They're all kind of going with a similar strategy of building up through the draft, young core, and then all seem to be ahead of schedule, besides maybe the Red Wings. That might be arguable. Some fans would say that's a little behind schedule, but a lot of the people that cover it for us say that they're still ahead of schedule there. Now they're hot too, so they could have a similar run to the Tigers. But it's interesting to watch the strategy, because this is the tried and true strategy, but it's easy to say, hey, I want to layer in some free agents, or I want to trade the prospects, and obviously a lot of teams do that, like the Yankees and some of the other teams. But it's interesting because I talked to a local executive here from the West Michigan Whitecaps, and he was basically, this was before they signed Flaherty, before they signed Torres, and he was basically saying, hey, I want him to hold, man. I'm seeing all the talent here. I'm seeing it day in and day out here. I'm seeing the guys that went to the big leagues, and I want them to just have spots for all these guys. But like you said, it's good to layer in some veterans, and I'm sure he would maybe not necessarily be the biggest fan of the Bregman signing, but you can't really argue with it from a standpoint of the star power and hopefully potential leadership that he brings. But I got to think it's going to come down to the number, which it sounds like every team and Bregman are kind of far apart on the number from what I've read anyway.
Yeah, it does feel that way. With this kind of a negotiation, especially with a Scott Boras client, someone eventually is probably going to blink and make the bigger offer, step it up an extra year. And I don't know that that's going to be the Tigers. The Tigers do seem like, they've kind of reached a point where they haven't heard anything about them, upping their offer or changing it. It kind of felt for the longest time like the Tigers probably had the best offer. But, Scott Boras is going to play chicken till the end, and sometimes it bites him, and other times it doesn't. But I have to agree, at least in principle, with the idea that, the farm system is absolutely stacked. We saw, the farm system when we had, Torkelson, Green, Skubal, Manning, Mize, and we thought that was pretty good. The farm system is a lot better now. And it's deep all the way down into the complex league levels, and I can really see them sustaining this for a long time. And I know Scott Harris has at least mentioned, that they might pursue a trade. And I do think there are some players that they should probably consider trading, but I wouldn't want to trade anybody big at this point. I don't want to trade Jackson Jobe, Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, Lorenzo, none of these guys. I think they're set up to be a really, really solid team for the next 10 years. And then it's just a matter of being able to rotate through as guys get more expensive, making the right trade in seasons where maybe they're not having as good a run. And then knowing, when to push in your chips a little bit. For my money, that's right now, because I think there's kind of a window here of, 2 years of Tarek Skubal, 2 years where A.J. Hinch and Chris Fetter seem to be ahead of the curve with the rest of the league, and that doesn't necessarily last. I want to take advantage, is my feeling right now, that they should push in. Javi Baez will come off the books in 3 years. If Alex Bregman's, third, fourth, fifth, sixth year, he's going into a decline phase, it's still not going to really hurt them that much because they're going to have so much young talent coming up that they're not going to really be in a position where they need to go after a big free agent really again. They're going to be able to sit back, snipe deals that appeal to them, find value in free agent contracts like they did with Torres, with having Flaherty, really enjoy his time here, forge some good relationships with Chris Fetter, with Tarek Skubal and some of the other guys. Feel really comfortable coming back here. That's another thing that Scott Harris has preached a lot, that, as someone who writes a lot about analytics, sometimes I can, it can go a little bit far with the rah-rah team spirit thing, but there's certainly an element to that where you've got to have guys who can gel together and push in the same direction all at the same time. That is crucial. It just doesn't necessarily overlay talent sometimes. So, yeah, they're in an interesting position here where I think they can go in a lot of different ways. They can start the season with what they've got and make a trade at the deadline if they feel they need to, and some of the younger guys aren't really taking a step forward. They could push in for Bregman right now, and that kind of solves the major roster issue for them. It puts Matt Veerling firmly in right field most days, so you're better defensively out there. You've got Kerry Carpenter then on the bench, where hopefully you can keep his back healthy. And you got Alex Bregman, who is, a born winner, team leader, excellent defender, pure hitter, not kind of the opposite of Javi Baez, if we're being honest. And I love me some young Javi Baez. I'm not a Javi Baez basher, but, we all know it's pretty much at the end of the road here with Javi. So, they've got a lot of flexibility. They've got a lot of options, and they've got a lot of assets right now, from the coaching staff to the farm system to the major league roster and to their payroll flexibility, I think. So the situation is really, really good right now.
Hey, Brandon, producer Mike here. You touched on a lot of what I was going to ask you, but the Baez signing 3 years ago is definitely an anchor for the Tigers now, and they're dreading every second that they signed him up till now. How he comes back this spring, is he any kind of a productive player? We'll see. But switch it over to, that was Alavila signing him, and how about Scott Harris? He started with the Cubs, and then he went out to the Giants, and he learned under whomever, and he brought that same mentality to the Tigers, and you've seen it for how long he's been there. He's not going to make the big old splash. We've heard about Alex Bregman all winter long. Are they going to do it? Are they going to do it? Are they waiting? Other teams are interested, now they're not, or they're just also waiting. What's your take on the way that Scott Harris has run things since he's got there? I don't think he's wavered much. What do you think?
No, I'd have to agree. He hasn't. But, of course, it is also, 2 years. It's 2 seasons, and they hadn't really got to this point where they could really realistically view themselves as a contender. So it's entirely possible that he's willing to change gears at least a little bit here. I think we all know the Tigers aren't going to be a team that is going out there and trying to pursue the top guys all the time. That's going to be a once every 4 or 5 year deal where they're willing to push in and sign someone to a long-term contract. I think overall, like, the word I would use for Scott Harris is like comprehensive. Like, Scott Harris is involved in everything. He's involved in, helping the player development staff, the analysts, the whole thing. He knows the organization really well for only having been here 2 years. He's got some of his people in here, but he also did a really smart thing, I think, in not trying to, overhaul everything overnight. And he kept a lot of the institutional knowledge and the relationships that were inside. And obviously he had a huge asset in A.J. Hinch. And, to my mind, A.J. Hinch is really the linchpin to almost everything that's happened, from some of the coaching hires that they've had to the way they've rebuilt the coaching staff in the player development system, to scouting. A.J. Hinch has a huge Rolodex of contacts. Whatever people out there, think about the cheating scandal, and, there's certainly things that need to be held over A.J.'s head for at least some more amount of time as far as that's concerned. A.J. Hinch knows a lot of people. A.J. Hinch is very well liked and respected, and, getting him into this organization, to me, was the big turning point. And, Scott Harris has done a pretty masterful job of keeping his assets and still being able to upgrade in other places without feeling, especially the pressure a young executive might have to not have people question him, to not have older staff who've been on, in the Tigers organization for years, kind of questioning this young punk's decisions. He wasn't afraid of that, and I think that's a credit to him as well. I had no worries about Scott Harris as far as player development, scouting, drafting players. He was going to be good in that. He was going to be good at finding value. The only question really is, it's really, really hard to win a World Series or even contend for one if you're not going to sign a big free agent, if you're not going to make a big deal. I can't really think of a team that's done it. Even the Kansas City Royals, who are probably the most recent example a fairly low payroll team, they were still a little bit beyond their means, and they did sign Edison Volquez to fill out their rotation and made some big trades that really helped them. And that finishing school portion of this is where Scott Harris still has to be tested. And, he doesn't need to rush it, but I also don't want to see them, kind of just stand pat all season and kind of see how it goes and try to just play all their young players. They can kind of hold some of those guys and let them develop. And, that's kind of the final test for a GM is, can you make that big move? The Dave Dombrowski era is long gone. We're not going to see those kinds of huge, wild trades. We're not going to have Mike Ilitch flinging money at problems. I think we all understand that it's not going to be that way anymore. And that way of doing business is fun for a little while, but you eventually blow your tires and, you're left on the side of the road with nothing left. So you hope you won something when you were trying, and then you're in really bad shape. And they were in really, really bad shape, circa 2016, 17, 18. Farm system was barren. There was no investment in it. There was no investment in coaching, facilities. There was nothing. They stripped the thing down to the parts and put every bit of it on the major league field. And Scott Harris is going to do a much more consistent job of keeping this team, at least in the range of 500 year after year, and hopefully be able to find those moves that can push them over the top and give us a couple of, World Series, at least appearances. You can't say how it's going to go, but I think he'll have the gumption here eventually when he finds the right move to push in some chips here and try to take them to the next step.
Yeah, they're playing the long game here for sure, and it does seem like they're on the verge of that. But I want to come back here after the break and talk about some of the organizational pieces that you were talking about. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Having a great talk here with Brandon Day of Bless You Boys. He's given us some great answers about some of the key issues with the Tigers. Yeah, I want to hit on one of the things that you said earlier in the interview here, because I feel like I like to look at the organizational piece, because that's usually where a lot of the stuff comes to. I think fans have a tendency to go, oh, well, if that guy wouldn't have struck out here, or if this one play wouldn't have happened. But there's such a bigger picture involved into crafting these teams. It does come down to the single plays sometimes, but it is about building an organization, building a culture. And you mentioned Hinch, which is obviously, I agree with you, he's the linchpin. But when you talked about the pitcher acquisitions, those are obviously great acquisitions. Flaherty was great. Cobb has had some great years. But no matter who they get, I look at it and I say, well, they've got Chris Fetter still, so they're probably going to be good. Yeah,
I feel exactly the same. And then, and they already had Juan Nieves, who's a good pitching coach in his own right in certain senses, and does a nice job in the bullpen. And then they bring in, Robin Lund, who's a biomechanics professor and pitching coach for the University of Iowa, and he's had a big impact as well. But it all goes through Chris Fetter, and it just seems like, Chris Fetter can pretty much put a pitching staff together out of anything and, kind of be at least a middle of the road, run prevention team. He really has been an enormous asset to them. I know, almost every year since he's been here, we've had people asking us, are the Yankees going to come and, offer him a ton of money? Obviously, people have this on their mind after they saw Gwynn and Ben Johnson leave from the Lions. So, but, Chris Fetter is a Michigan guy, a University of Michigan guy specifically. He turned down some teams in advance of, signing on with A.J. Hinch because of the relationship that he and Hinch have, and also because he was willing, to take that leap to the major leagues here where he's raising his young family. He wasn't going to take the money to go to New York right away or to Arizona right away, which were the two teams I know were interested in him. And, he's still young. Maybe there's time for him to do those things otherwise, but right now we are in very good shape as far as the coaching staff of this team, I think. And yeah, you just see, every year they seem to put it together with someone. They signed Michael Lorenzen in 2023. It didn't last. The Tigers' mojo, apparently can wear off once they get traded away. But Michael Lorenzen had, the best first half of his career as a starter, which he'd rarely been. They got a pretty nice prospect for him in How You Lead, who I think is underrated. And then they signed Flaherty last year. Flaherty goes on to the best season of his career, really, the best first half at least. Struggled some with the Dodgers. We know he had a little bit of back tightness and some issues there. And some of that stuff and the fact that he lost a little bit of velocity in the postseason scared some teams away, I think. But, Chris Fetter seems to find these guys and get them tuned up and dialed in and has a plan for them that isn't like so radical that it can't be implemented. He's really good at working with what they've got. He's really good at reading swings and reading hitters and coming up with game plans that work for a whole different, types of pitchers. He doesn't just need one type of guy. We saw Houston for a while, would have a few sinker ballers in there like Dallas Keuchel and, obviously Framber Valdez now, but they were really big on the super high spin, high fastball guys who had a big downer curveball or slider, and they sought the same type of guys a lot. And if you were good at hitting, those type of pitchers, you might hit the Astros better than most teams. Whereas better, there's just a huge collection of different pitchers with different strengths. And it doesn't hurt, that you have Comerica Park to work with. Obviously, if you can get them to hit the ball to the big part of the park, you're going to save yourself some runs. But Chris Fetter has just kind of put it all together here and really, really turned this into, the kind of organizational strength that, like the Guardians have had for years now, just developing pitchers, one after the other, going through different actual major league pitching coaches even. But because that organizational knowledge was there, they were just able to kind of keep going. And, yeah, Chris Fetter has brought that to the Tigers for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Lund because I remember being at an event with Dan Dickerson, and before all of this stuff kind of caught fire, this was about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, he was talking about Lund and how that was going to be a big acquisition and the whole gamification of the analyzation of the pitching and how that was going to be a big acquisition, and it clearly has, along with Fetter and everything. And I heard you mention Lee. I know the ML Report guys are big on him as well. So yeah, it's interesting to talk about these pieces that are coming along. I think Mike's got another question for you here too.
Yeah, Brandon. We talked about Jack Flaherty, and he had a great first part of the year. He bet on himself. That's the way they call it now. And he had a down year the year before, and he had to come back, and the Tigers helped him. And he gets traded away and get two great prospects to come over, and now he's back. Scott Harris has talked about since day one, want to make this a place where you want to come. For a long time, when you're down, nobody wants to come here. You have to, beg and pull fingernails out and stuff. But Jack Flaherty proved that. I mean, on the whole course of across the major leagues, Flaherty coming back after we got rid of him last summer and getting those two prospects, now he's back. Does that happen? Is that happening around the league?
It doesn't happen very often with smaller market teams. There's usually money talking there. When you're the Dodgers, it might happen even if the money's not great because you have a chance to win. There's a couple teams that can say that, but for the most part, no. It's the culture, it's the emphasis that they've placed on having good guys, and we've all followed sports. We all know not to idolize athletes. Things can happen, but from everything I see and everyone I know who's around the team, this is a pretty fun group of guys who really likes each other. Pretty family oriented, generally more wholesome maybe than some Tigers teams of the past, and in general, they seem to get along well, and people seem to like playing here. And when they leave, they seem to spread the word a little bit, and there's a bit of a Johnny Appleseed situation that goes on when you bring guys in and you can help them and they have a good time there and, they find, kind of some new traction in their career and they go out into the rest of the league with different teams. Maybe we traded them, maybe they signed somewhere else. And, there's a lot of good word being spread about the Tigers and what they've got going on here. And, the Tigers are probably not going to be the team that's going to overpay you a fortune and just make you come here. But a lot of times those guys end up not happy. You definitely want guys, especially if you're paying for them, you want them to come here and be invested in more than just making the max dollars. So, I think the entire philosophy has worked out pretty well for them so far. And, they seem, pretty much dead set on keeping to that. Bregman makes a good fit here. There aren't that many other big free agents who are going to come up in the next couple of years who are necessarily going to want to come here to play with A.J. Hinch, who he and Bregman obviously have a strong relationship. He likes the idea of being on a young team that has, a long contention window starting to open. So all those factors are starting to make the Tigers more attractive. And I think Scott Harris is in a good position to take advantage of that without, necessarily breaking the bank repeatedly. There's going to be one big signing probably in the next couple of years, whether it's Bregman or not, and that's probably going to be it for a while. but they may not need much more than that, to be honest. That farm system is just looking really, really good to me.
Yeah, it's almost like you just have to play this out and see where those prospects get to here at their peak. But yeah, there is something to the culture here, the culture that the team is forming, and then along with the fans, because I feel like that is a draw for some of the players, because I think that holds them here for longer, because they are truly beloved by the fans here, even though there may not be some of the other positives like weather and bigger markets that they may have elsewhere. But Brandon, great stuff. We appreciate you being on the show. We'll definitely have you back on the show. Wealth of knowledge, as you can tell by the interview. Tell people where they can find you here.
Yeah, we've got all of our stuff up at blessyouboys.com. You can read everything there. We're putting out prospect reports on our top 41 prospect list just about every day. And, coverage is about to ramp up. So please join us there.
Yeah, it's already looking very good. I've been following it here in the off season, but yeah, we look forward to having you back on. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh, I had a good time, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Take care. All right, thanks to Brandon Day. Appreciate him coming on here. We'll have him back on. Like I said, he does a great job covering the Tigers, but we're going to switch to the Lions here. We're still having some Lions coverage. We got to talk about some of the prospects that they may draft and get somebody from Michigan Sports Media on here. So Jace Sweet will be on after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're coming back here with a little Lions coverage here. I know people are getting focused on other things. We just concluded the Super Bowl. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. I know people are sad that the Lions weren't in it, but I think they're gearing up towards next year here. We talked about some of the coaching changes on the show with some of the people that have been on the show, and it's going to be time soon to turn our attention to draft coverage, because even though the draft is not as big of a deal to the Lions as it has been in the previous years, where they may have been in the top 5 or at the top of the draft, it's still going to be a big deal because of how well Holmes has done in the draft so far. So I've been following this guy for a little while here. This is Jace Sweet. He's of Michigan Sports Media, and he does a great job breaking down prospects and stuff. So we want to bring him on to talk about some of the prospects. He watched all the footage from the Senior Bowl and where the Lions might be headed. So we appreciate you being on the show, Jace.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. I've been following your coverage. I was going to try to run into you at the Senior Bowl. I know you unfortunately weren't able to travel due to all the crud going around here, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. But hopefully you're on the mend, and at least you had time to watch a lot of tape then, probably.
Oh yeah, I still had to take those days off of work, unfortunately. So I was just kind of sitting here watching the practices as they went. So I obviously didn't get the same close-up look that you guys did, but I was still able to keep an eye on it from afar.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll make it next year. The Senior Bowl is a cool event because you do get a lot more access. I tend to like the events that you get more access for. Like going to the Super Bowl would be great, but you're probably going to be up in the nosebleeds unless you're somehow involved in the game. With the Senior Bowl, you can get down right close to the field, sometimes on the field. It's been the same way when I've attended like the Basketball Hall of Fame ceremony and some other things. You can get some unprecedented access at some of those events. But yeah, I ended up skipping the practices myself because I was visiting my dad at the same time. So we just went to the game, but we were like 7th row back on the 50-yard line for the game, so we were in pretty good shape there. But yeah,
that's nice.
I'm curious of your takes here because I watched some of the prospects, and obviously there was a lot of big names I thought this year at the Senior Bowl, but I'm curious who caught your eye and who caught your eye specifically for the Lions.
So actually I kind of have a long list here. So, obviously we don't have to talk about all of these guys, but I would just like to mention all of them, and then I can talk about some guys more in depth. So just kind of going down my list, I have Marshall Edge, Mike Green, Texas A&M defensive lineman Shamar Stewart, Ole Miss D lineman Walter Nolan, which obviously he's going to be gone before we're ever able to pick, but man, he killed it at the Senior Bowl. Missouri offensive tackle Armand Membau, North Carolina offensive lineman Willie Lampkin. He's the undersized phenom, as we've seen. North Dakota State offensive lineman Gray Zabel, Miami offensive lineman Jalen Rivers, Iowa State offensive lineman Jalen Travis, Georgia O-line Jared Wilson. Carson Vincent also caught my eye. He's more of a small school guy. Purdue offensive lineman Marcus Membau, USC offensive lineman Jonah Monheim, Sacramento State O-lineman Jackson Slater, Florida State defensive lineman Joshua Farmer, Boston College edge Donovan, and I always mess this up, I'm not even going to try. Let's just call him Easy. Virginia Tech D lineman Aeneas Peebles, Toledo defensive lineman Darius Alexander, Tennessee D lineman Omar Norman Lott, Texas edge Baron Sorrell, Central Arkansas edge David Walker, Oregon defensive lineman Jamari Caldwell, Ole Miss D lineman Jared Ivey, South Carolina D lineman TJ Sanders, Iowa D lineman Yaya Black, Nebraska D line Ty Robinson, Arkansas D line Landon Jackson, and finally Auburn D lineman Kyrian Ingram Dawkins. And obviously, it's a lot of names, it's a big list, so I'm probably going to mention, maybe 5 guys here in depth. Some of my favorites, though, one is Gray Zabel, and I'm sure everybody saw him during the Senior Bowl. He absolutely dominated. It seemed like he was one of, if not the best lineman at the Senior Bowl. And for being a small school kid to show up and kind of dominate like that against these big school guys, he really earned himself some money. Like, he's now being talked about in the first round, and before that, I would say he was more of a third-round guy. So he probably had the biggest rise that I saw from any of the guys that the Lions might be interested in. Excuse me. Unfortunately, he will probably be a first-round, early second-round pick, so we most likely won't grab him unless we do get him at 28. And I wouldn't hate that personally, but it feels a little early for us to draft an offensive lineman right now. But again, I won't be mad. Brad Holmes is a bit of a genius. When he drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, we were all kind of a bit skeptical, and look at us now. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I really was surprised by Oregon defensive lineman Jamari Caldwell. He was probably the biggest surprise for me on the defensive line, because we all knew he was a big guy, good, strong defensive lineman. But, man, he showed some twitch and some quicks that we didn't really see on film. So I really, really enjoyed what I saw from him specifically.
Yeah, one thing I find interesting about a lot of those names that you mentioned, which you said, there are a lot of names. There's a lot of prospects going through the process. We talked to former Lions running back and current agent who was also at the Senior Bowl we talked to him last week, and we talked about the fact that there's, the process has gotten so big now and all of that. But what stuck out to me is there's a lot of defensive linemen on that list.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's a position of interest for the Lions, but it does seem, because this is all supply and demand, sometimes there's positions that maybe it needs for too many teams, and then therefore the supply doesn't necessarily meet the needs. This makes me think of defensive backs last year, because I feel like almost every team that picked a defensive back early got a good value, including the Lions drafting Arnold where they did, and we saw that with the Eagles with Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, because I feel like there were teams going for other things there. So do you feel like that might be defensive line this year, where I know there's certain players that we say, well, that guy won't be around by the time the Lions pick, but you would have said that a lot about a lot of the corners last year that were still around. Line seems pretty deep so far this year.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, this is one of the deeper defensive line classes I've seen in a long time, specifically on the interior. There's obviously some good edges as well, but it's not quite as deep there. But this interior defensive line class is crazy deep. They have guys that I would say will probably get picked in the 4th, 5th round that likely would be, mid-third rounders in most drafts, just based on how deep this draft is. Because obviously you're going to see a lot of guys getting reached on because of, positional value. But I feel like this is, like I said, probably one of the deeper classes at defensive line I've seen in a while.
Which, again, fits pretty well with who we assume the Lions will go after, because last year cornerback was an obvious need, and it matched well with what was available, and then ended up doubling up. I could see something similar here, because it's like if you get that defensive end, whatever they're going for, heavy defensive end on the other side, depending on what happens with Zadarius Smith and some other things, then you can still then double up and get an interior lineman if you want, because there's somebody available that you liked from the process. So that should match up well. Like you said, offensive line is a need, but hopefully between Mahogany and maybe they try to re-sign Glasgow for cheaper or whatever, defensive line seems to be the leader in the clubhouse for the best bet for them to go after, maybe not in the first round, but in the draft pretty heavily.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I personally, my train of thought with this draft, if I'm Brad Holmes, I'm trading back, or at least trying to. Obviously, you have to have someone who wants to trade up to make that happen. But I would really like to see us trade back, maybe even out of the first round, just because of how deep this D-line class is. You know, get a guy who you would probably pick at 28, but, you know, you could still get him at 35 or so. And then you can double up, like you said, later on that position in the third, fourth, fifth round with those extra picks that you end up adding, or even with your original picks, and then go elsewhere with those extra picks. So I would completely agree that this D-line class is working out perfect for what the Lions really need. The only thing I would say about that is I wish there was more top-end elite talent at the edge, because obviously we have Abdul Carter, and then after him there's a bit of a drop-off. And then those other 3 to 4 guys probably won't even make it to us at 28. So edge, I would say, is one of our biggest needs, that it's going to be tough to find somebody in the draft outside of the first round that can really come in day one. But there's still a lot of potential at that position too. It's not thin by any means.
Oh yeah. And I've always been in favor of Holmes having more resources rather than less, especially, I mean, that's good for every GM, of course, but man, his percentage that he hits on in the draft, especially, it feels you have such confidence with no matter where he's picking, because he's found values at pretty much every level of the draft, whether it's the third day, late in the draft. I mean, look at Mahogany, who I just mentioned, that was a 6th round pick, and there's a guy that a lot of people want to have start here next year.
Right, and I completely agree. The more darts you give that guy, the better, because he's shown and proven that, I mean, yeah, he drafts really good in the first round, but that's, you know, I would say most people would expect that, whereas he's getting guys like Amon-Ra and, like you said, Mahogany in the 6th round. He's had a pretty good hit rate past the 3rd round, so more darts for him, the better, I will definitely always say.
Oh, yeah, and it's been fun to watch him build up this team so quickly, but I want to talk about that team building, because this is, you know, this is a different stage in their journey here with the draft, with being back in the draft, with potentially losing free agents because they just can't pay everybody, and they've got such a deep roster now. So I'll return with that, and especially the coaching piece too, because Jace is a coach as well. So we'll return to talk a lot about the organizational build here after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Jace Sweet of Michigan Sports Media. Yeah, Jace, we've been talking about this with the last few Lions guests that have been on, because we've had one pretty much every week since the Lions season, the Lions part of the season ended. And this is unprecedented territory for the Lions, because I know people are focusing on the coaching changes, which there are a lot. I think it counts up to 7 at least now of coaches that have left. But this is part of being a good organization. People are going to want a piece of your organization because you've created a culture, you've created something that the other teams want to benefit from. And so we're going to start to see the reverse of what we used to see, which is we were picking high in the draft, and okay, who are we going to get at the top end of the draft? What waiver cuts can we steal from other teams? What free agents can we get because the other teams can't pay them? Now the Lions are going to be in that position, so it'll be an interesting new development for Holmes, and to see where he actually goes with a lot of this. But his main objective has been to build through the draft the entire time, and build people and get people that fit in their culture, which aren't necessarily the top guys every time anyway. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are. There's a lot of rumors on this Myles Garrett trade, and everybody always wants the big splashy trade, but that would mean giving up a lot of assets and taking away those darts, like you said, from a Brad Holmes.
Yeah, so actually recently I've written 2 articles in the last 3 days about this, so it's kind of a hot topic right now, as you know. I am on the boat of I'm okay with whatever Brad Holmes decides, but if I were the GM in this situation, I don't think I can make this trade because you're not only giving up 2 first-round picks, right? You have to also choose between one of Jameson Williams or Kirby Joseph to extend, basically. So you're not only giving up 2 first-round picks, most likely, you're also essentially including one of Kirby or JMO in that trade. I just feel like that's a little bit too much for a 30-year-old pass rusher, even though he is as amazing as Myles Garrett is. I would probably go more of a pass rush by committee approach at this point because you already have Hutchinson. And everybody, I find it kind of funny personally because everybody's overreacting to the Eagles right now. Their defensive line dominated the Chiefs, of course. But it wasn't really guys off the edge. It was more guys in their interior. And I would say we already have the stud Aiden Hutchinson. We have a decent defensive tackle pass rusher in Ali McNeil. And decent's probably a bit of a slight at this point. He was pretty good at the end of the season, especially after Hutch went down. I would go and sign a couple guys in free agency, like a Khalil Mack or a DeMarcus Lawrence or, something along those lines to a 1-year deal. You go draft one, like we talked about earlier, and then with how deep this defensive line class is right now, you draft maybe 2 defensive tackles because Levi is gone after the season. Broderick Martin hasn't really worked out that well. And then you're looking at, a defensive line that's super deep. So if we have injuries like we did this year, we're pretty much fine. You got the veteran presence like a DeMarcus Lawrence, who is a pretty good player in his own right. He's not Myles Garrett, but, he was considered a top 10 pass rusher not that long ago. Same thing with Khalil Mack. He had 17 sacks just a season ago. I just think there's better ways to go about it than to mortgage the future. But if Brad Holmes decides that's what he thinks is the best thing, I wouldn't be upset because just how good Myles Garrett is. And who knows, he might be able to, mess with the cap a little bit and keep those guys. Just with how it looks right now, it doesn't look like it's a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make as an overarching point, which is none of these decisions happen in a vacuum. Sure, it's great to get Myles Garrett if it were in a vacuum and if it didn't affect the payroll and the opportunity to keep and acquire somebody else. And so I think you hit the nail on the head with, like, hey, you can have him and you can talk about windows and how long the window is open as much as you want, but it's not necessarily going to change the fact that you're then taking another player that you don't know how well he's going to fit your culture. But Myles Garrett's a great player and would play well everywhere, but he is kind of an interesting, unique kind of guy. He has very unique interests. You don't know how he's going to fit into the culture. You don't know how he's going to fit opposite Aiden Hutchinson, whereas you do have some information with how these other guys do. And we have to keep in mind that this defensive line didn't play together all year because Smith, if they decide to retain him, they didn't have him at the beginning of the season, obviously, and they didn't have a complete defensive line. And I agree with where you were trending with that McNeil thing. I think I'm very high on him. I think he's trending towards kind of the elite or whatever the tier would be below elite as far as defensive tackles here. So you pair him with Hutchinson and potentially Reeder is back then and Smith, and then you layer in Owunzurike, Pascal. You've got a pretty good defensive line. It might not be as stout or as imposing as the Eagles' defensive line on paper, but they're also probably going to lose some of those guys too.
Yeah, and that's a big thing I haven't heard too much about this Myles Garrett conversation is he's going to want a new deal, and we're talking about Aiden Hutchinson getting a new deal around the same time. So you're basically forking up what would it be, about $70 million a year to your defensive ends in one season. And I just feel, that's a little bit much to pay. And then, like you said with Zadarius Smith, he had a pretty good year last year with us, and that's without Hutchinson across from him. So if I'm Brad Holmes, I'm kind of sitting back and going, we've got some solid guys already in the building. Let's add some bodies to this rotation that know how to get after it, add some young talent with the picks we would give up for Myles Garrett. And then, we're talking about the next 4 or 5 years because then we have the rookies to make that longevity happen.
Yeah, and that's clearly how they've built this team. I mean, if you look back to basically the origin of this team, which of course is Holmes and Campbell and all the players they've acquired along the way. But it's really that Stafford trade, because you get Goff and you get all of those assets, get all of those darts, as you put it, and you're able to fire those as you go here and turn them into Gibbs and Laporta and Melifonwu and all of these different players. And I think it's smartest to try to arm yourself with more of that, even if you're later in the draft, because Holmes is going to find value, and then you're resetting that payroll at the bottom. You're resetting those signings. As soon as you try to buy high on somebody, that's where you can kind of turn your cap upside down.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And I feel like the Lions right now are in that spot where a lot of people, for some reason, are like, oh, we missed our window. We were 15-2 last year, or this year, with a team that really, we had a lot of guys coming off the street to come and play, from week 6 and on. And I just feel like it's kind of odd to me to think we missed our window when it just opened. Like, we're talking about a team that not too long ago had 3 wins, and within 3 seasons has now had the best season their franchise has ever had. I just feel it's better to build for the future, because a lot of people talk about the window, but I think it's better to make the window as big as possible. Even if you don't have necessarily the top tier talent of Myles Garrett, you have more talent around the entire team.
Definitely. And we keep going back to this, but yeah, you keep that window open for longer by drafting those players, those cheaper players that then can fill roles that were filled by more expensive players, not making an expensive role more expensive, because I feel like that's the discussion too going on. We talked about Garrett, but that's the same discussion really with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's a great player. He's a great story. I've loved watching his career. He had great chemistry with Stafford, of course, but when you have the option to maybe re-sign Tim Patrick, the latest projection I saw was maybe like a year for $2 million. I think Justin Rogers wrote that. If you have a chance to get him for $2 million, is Cooper Kupp really $18 million better as a fit? Probably not, because although he's a more talented player, he probably isn't even as good of a fit in this offense as Patrick is. I know some people probably spit out their drink when I said that, but it's the idea that Patrick can block on the outside and can be okay with the lower usage that comes with that position when you're trying to get J-Mo, St. Brown, both running backs, and Laporta involved, because Laporta, I would say, the most out of anybody, felt that decline of, hey, we only got one ball and we've got to spread it around to all these weapons.
Yeah, for sure, and I'm completely on that same train of thought when it comes to Cooper Kupp. The only way I'd really even think about adding Kupp to this situation is if he was cut. I am not giving up draft capital to then pay him, like you said, $19 million a year over the next 2. Maybe if it was a 1-year deal, I'd throw him a 6th or a 7th just to do it, just to add some talent, another piece for this new offensive coordinator. But I just feel, again, like you said, Tim Patrick's kind of a better fit for what we need right now. We don't have a true X receiver. Tim Patrick kind of fits that mold with his size, speed ratio. Amon-Ra is our slot guy. Is Cooper Kupp going to be our X? I don't think that would necessarily be a great idea with where he's at in his career. I'd agree on all points. I just don't think Cooper would fit well here. Yeah, and I feel like, because I think a lot of people, we were talking with Ty Schulter a couple weeks ago, and I know he was one of the ones that kind of was early in on this, but there's from a lot of fans, we grew up playing Madden, and it was fun to be the GM, and it was fun to make the player acquisitions and make the picks, but the real NFL isn't like Madden. You can't just have a simulated version of what things look like on paper. You have to actually play the games, and you have to actually pay these guys and fit them in somewhere. And so it's a lot different. Sure, yeah, throwing to all those targets would be great, but yeah, what route tree, what part of the route tree are they going to be? All of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to talk about these individual deals, because I've had people bring them to me and say, "Oh, well, come on, but they got to go all in. They've got to take advantage of the window. How about we extend the window? How about we leave the window open for longer?" I feel like that's a better strategy too. But
Great stuff, Jace. We appreciate you being on the show. We want to talk more prospects with you as we get closer to the draft, but tell people where they can find you. I know you're building a lot of media-related stuff over there.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter or Instagram or really any social media at Jace O Sweet, JACEOSWEET. You can also find Michigan Sports Media, misportsmedia.com, and on Twitter, misportsmedia, and pretty much anywhere else, Michigan Sports Media. We cover all Michigan sports all the way down to college. So we're a new up-and-coming media brand, but we're building our way up, and doing stuff like this really helps. So I appreciate you having me on.
Definitely, that's what we like to highlight on this show. You gotta start somewhere, and it's good coverage. I think people saw that. Obviously, a knowledgeable guy. Jace is a coach as well, and he's building something here. So, and there may even be talk of having me on the show. So I'd be happy to come on to your podcast when that happens, and we'll have you back on the show closer to the draft. But we appreciate you being on the show here.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jace. Take care. All right. Thanks to Jace Sweet. Appreciate him being on the show here. We're going to turn our attention to basketball for the final hour of the show. We're going to have Mike Wozniak on next. He was an NBA executive. He's a local businessman here now, but he was one of the first hires in the international division of the NBA back in 1992. So he'll have an interesting perspective of everything that's going on in the modern day, now seeing what's happened here many years later. So we'll talk to him next. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. I'm excited to get this guy on the show. I was just telling my producer, Mike, that I met him at a Panera Bread in a different meeting here with my other business, and we ended up talking for about a half hour in the business meeting about sports. So I'm pretty sure we can do it on air here. He's got a very interesting history. He was an NBA executive, hired very early on in the international division by David Stern, came up with Adam Silver, and now he runs a local consulting business here. So this is Mike Wozniak. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Good hearing from you, Ryan.
Yeah, definitely. Nice to talk with you again here. We'll put our sports conversation to good use here on the air. But this is a great time to have you on, too, because we were just talking about kind of the evolution of the game in the break, and how when I was young, when I was 9, my mom took me to the original, when they were doing the Olympics in 92, they had the play-in, the trials, whatever you want to call them, in Portland here stateside, as I'm sure you know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And maybe even you were involved in it. I think you got into it right after that. But it was so interesting to watch that, and then now watch as an adult and realize that was the linchpin in the development of the international game and the game of basketball in general. So to have a Luka Doncic trade that was such a big deal the other day, this young guy from Slovenia, that wouldn't have happened without any of that stuff in 92.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us could imagine what has taken place over the last 30 years or so. But yeah, back in the day when I actually met with David Stern, who was the commissioner at the time, I always remember him saying to me, "I don't know what's going to happen here, but we've kind of latched our brand onto this Olympic wagon, and we want to bring myself on." I was the third hire in 1992, and it literally does take a generation for something to kind of kick in and click. And sure enough, over probably the last 10, 15 years, the NBA has completely flipped. I mean, it might be like 50% now international players. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. I know the game has changed a lot over time, but it's like I said, with a guy like Luka Doncic, it's amazing to think back to that era and say, okay, there's a kid that's not even born yet, and he's going to be from Slovenia, and he's going to be involved in one of the biggest NBA trades in NBA history, and be one of the biggest players in the game, along with a rotund 7-footer from Serbia and everybody else that's come from the international ranks. I think it's fun because it's just whatever you thought the evolution of the game was going to be. Obviously, it's a game built on athleticism and speed and quickness, but then you've got these guys like Doncic and Jokic that have such skill that they're finding their own pathway there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I go back and think about, some of those early on meetings in our office, I mean, the idea was, it's hard to recall. I mean, in that this is before the internet. So this is mid '90s, and the only global media was TV, and there really wasn't a global media. And so the Olympics and the World Cup of soccer perhaps were those two global brands, if you will, that everybody paid attention to. And so that was the idea. Let's enter this. I mean, the gap was closing, or maybe even the amateur teams got beat, I think, by the professional Russian teams, et cetera. And so the thought was, let's grow our visibility by playing in this event, and no one really had any idea about how dominating that dream team actually was. But the thought was is that they begin to see it, they expose, and so our job then basically in the office was to go out and to just grow the sport. And when you're the leader in a category like the NBA brand, that will naturally, you want to grow the pie. And that's exactly what we were doing. So really one of the main tasks I had was just to grow the sport, getting more and more people to play the game. And I'm sure we'll get into it. I was actually out in Tokyo, but it was challenging. But you had to build playgrounds, and you had to educate media people, et cetera. And so just like you said, the Lucas then began seeing this. And so I began putting games on TV and out in these countries. And so people just began saying, well, where can I find a basketball? It's crazy to think you couldn't even find basketballs in Japan back in the mid-'90s and stuff. And so, baseball was a big sport, but basketball just wasn't. And so by developing all of that, it just kept snowballing. And so, you hear probably the expression, we stand on the shoulders of those before us. Well, clearly, it was the Yao Mings, it was the Dirk Nowitzkis, it was, we were all like hoping for somebody from India and China and Asia markets to be able to play at that level. But finally, I think with the Yao Ming, et cetera, just kind of really exploded and snowballed from that point on.
And to your point about standing on the shoulders, representation is so important with things like this. And so the idea that a little kid in China or in Slovenia or in Serbia has seen stars, Hall of Fame caliber players play from their country, that has to be eye-opening to them, and they could say, well, hey, I might be the next Luka Doncic or Yao Ming or Dirk Nowitzki or Nikola Jokic, whatever it is. And so you have to imagine that it's going to continue to grow the way that it has, which is amazing to think about, because you look at somebody like Victor Wembanyama, and it's like, how can the game evolve any more than this human being? Like, what can be more extreme than him?
Well, I know he really is amazing. Even like that. So again, back when you're trying to, develop in any sport really, the best athletes were always running to soccer. And all of a sudden now we started to show them, especially the taller players, that there was something else to do than just soccer. And so you get someone like Victor there that just, obviously 7-footer, probably wouldn't be as good at soccer, probably still a good athlete, but here he had something to kind of, with his height. So, yeah, it just gives athletes more opportunity. But, I mean, you think about Dr. J, and he was sort of the bar, and then you began getting these incredible athletes, or I guess then it was more like the Larry Bird that was the great shooter, and then now the Michael Jordan that just took it up to another level. But now there's so many athletic players that you wonder really how athletic Jordan would be in today's game. But players like, Victor and probably the next one coming up, incredible. These people handle the ball. They act like a guard, like a 1 or 2, and just amazing talent levels.
Well, and that's what's interesting about this current era of NBA to me, and the international flavor of it, is you do have Wemby, who is kind of the natural evolution of, okay, this is the evolution of human beings and of basketball and of nutrition and training and all of that. And so this guy is bigger and taller and has longer arms and has all the skills in the world. But then you have guys like a Luka or like a Jokic that aren't really, it's not their body type that is their advantage. It's their ability to play the game, and the fact that they play at a slower pace is actually an advantage for them at times, because the other guys are used to the game being so sped up that I just heard something the other day that was interesting. They were talking about how it's not how fast you can go, because once you get to the NBA, almost everybody is as fast as you, or there's a lot of players that are as fast as you. It's the ability to change pace, to slow that pace down and control the pace.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, too, someone like Luka, I mean, it's a cerebral level. I mean, that's why these Stocktons or the Birds, I mean, they had a IQ, Magic Johnson. They just have a feel. I mean, you get that feel that they understand the game, they understand where the ball is supposed to be and all that. So, yeah, there are still – you don't have to be the most athletic, but you do obviously have to have a giftedness, but an understanding of how the game all kind of comes together. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about it. It's fun to see, because I was at that one. I was at the 92 games, and then I've attended and worked at a couple of the other ones. I worked at the World Championships in Indiana in 2002, and then I was at the one, I think it was 98 in Toronto. I forget what year that was, but you'd probably, well, you'd know, but I don't know if you remember. There's a lot of data to remember, but it's fun to see the evolution of the game through those international events, because there was a while there where the U.S. wasn't necessarily the best team either, and I think that was a bit of a wake-up call, because I know that's been a discussion lately with Evan Fournier saying, hey, when in France we play together all year, and the U.S. team never does. They're always playing against each other.
Yeah, and I think obviously the money level is so high that it creates the silos, and so the country doesn't matter as much as it does for these other players, right? So there's just too many options here. But I was encouraged this last Olympics. I felt like these players actually wanted to win, and there was Steph bailed us out a few times, and different players. So there was a will there finally to kind of win. But a lot of times these guys don't. Just don't appreciate the country as much as those that are overseas. Yeah,
it is interesting to see that part of it evolve too. But yeah, this has been a great talk so far. We've talked about a lot of the international game. I know Mike's got some good stuff about the All-Star game, so I want to come back with that after the break. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Mike Wozniak, former NBA executive. Yeah, that was a great conversation about the international nature of the game. We could spend more time on that, but I know that obviously we have the All-Star game coming up, and that's an increasingly big event. All these events have gotten bigger over time. The international piece, the All-Star game, the Summer League, which wasn't even around, obviously at the beginning of your time there, but that's growing every year. I'd like to do that one of these years, but the All-Star game has grown. It's big news here because Cade Cunningham has been nominated to be an All-Star, and it's fun to watch him and the team evolve and these young guys develop there. But they have the Rising Stars game, they have the All-Star game. It's become a whole thing. So what are some of your takes on kind of the evolution of the All-Star game over time?
Yeah, it's always been a fun time. Obviously, the two big events that sort of are the crown jewels are the dunk contest, three-point shot. The game itself has really become playground. I think some of that, every year they're trying to find that formula, right, to make it. What didn't last year they get like 200 points, one of the teams?
Yeah.
It's just nuts. I mean, so I think that's probably been one of the things that I don't know if they anticipated, but because of, we talked about athleticism, the player being so athletic, I think the draw has been I want to get on ESPN, and so therefore my dunks get me on ESPN and AAU circuit. And so players have lost sort of those fundamentals, and I think that's where the overseas player has really closed that gap. And so the game now is just basically jacking up threes or dunks. And so it's sort of become an all-star game throughout the year in a crazy way. So I think there's some pullback of trying to figure it out. I know this year they're going to do something different. But for myself, yeah, I think I have to go back to 1993. That was probably my first all-star game. They're incredible in a sense of it's a, Thursday through Sunday, and really you're there to entertain partners from a business side. It's obviously having business partners from TV, sponsorship, development of the game, like I spoke about earlier, inviting all these people in, not only from obviously U.S. side, but internationally. That was our big opportunity, especially in the 90s, because games weren't played overseas. It was a chance to bring big business companies into the All-Star weekend. That was the most logical. It was high-end, just nonstop, probably. Well, I know from a Friday, like from about 3 o'clock all the way to 3 in the morning, and then Saturday, Sunday, just nonstop opportunities to do something with partners. But it was always a time then for the players, both active and also retired, to sort of make themselves available. And so you could then sort of have partners or have players join certain meetings. Often I would have players that I was assigned to. I remember Magic Johnson, Karl Malone I've been assigned to, a guy named Hershey Hawkins. There's a lot of different players that were great people, especially as you got to know them, they got to know you. And then the event itself, I mean, everything was high end. But I will share one of the funniest stories was, and I don't know what year it was, but I brought in a partner from Taiwan, and we went to one of these high end after dinner parties, almost like black tie level. And I met this guy in the lobby of this place, and he's talking to his assistant, and he wanted me to wait where I was before we kind of went into this big gala. And he brings this gift for me, and it's like this huge, it's like this box, and it was kind of heavy. I was kind of taken back, like, what is in this? And, he wanted me to open it, and I don't know where he got this idea, but he gave me a bowling ball. He gave me a bowling ball, and I'm walking into this gala with no holes, just a round bowling ball. And I remember, like, where am I going to put this bowling ball until I, give it to somebody at the hotel? And it just was kind of I always remember that. I'm like, what was the guy thinking? So anyways, it's kind of a funny story, but it definitely is nonstop fun, entertainment, and it's just a great weekend to be involved with.
Okay, I have a couple follow-up questions from this. This is often what happens with me. I do want to ask a follow-up question about representing guys like Hershey Hawkins and Magic Johnson, but I have to ask what you did with this bowling ball. Like, did you put it on a buffet and it like rolled down and then knocked everything over on the buffet, or what happened to this thing?
I remember it was the craziest thing because I think I was flying back to Tokyo right after. I don't have a bowling ball to check in. So I just dumped it at the airport. I never brought the thing home, but I brought it up to my room. So I don't know. It was the weirdest gift. I don't know why this person. I'm just trying to think. It must have been at a function at some point that I told them that something about bowling. But yeah, that's kind of funny.
That's funny. There's a lot of. So I used to work overseas, and as a diplomat and in intelligence, and there is an art and a science to gift giving. That's a big part of the diplomacy of things. Was there any tie there? Because I can't imagine. I haven't been to Taiwan, I myself, but I can't imagine they have a lot of bowling over there.
No, I've been to Taiwan too. That's obviously I was working with this partner. I still don't know what that was about, and somehow it just got misinterpreted. But yeah, obviously I had to take the gift, and he didn't know that I dropped it back off, nor did he know that I never made it back. So we'll just keep that a secret.
Yeah. I don't know how our listenership is in Taiwan anyway, so I don't think we're too worried
I
there.
think we're good.
Yeah.
But
But that's funny. So I do want to go back to, so when you say you represented players like Magic Johnson, what did that entail? How did that work?
Yeah, it was
assigned to
simply,
them?
let's say, it was simply like at a lunch or a meeting. I would give the opportunity to bring this player into that meeting, them to take pictures, sign autographs, so things like that. Again, the players didn't go overseas, especially during the season, and this was their only touch point, was to bring these partners of ours that were spending 6-7 figures to connect with the player in some way. So it was that kind of a thing where you just sort of make sure that they were greeted and welcomed and thanked.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, yeah, that had to be a unique perspective to meet some of those players and then see them interact in a unique environment that they weren't necessarily used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, there weren't any jerks. Everybody was great. Everybody was very warm. Players bend over backwards to make others happy. They really understand the connection of sport and basketball and the responsibility, if you will. So yeah, it was always a special time.
There's a lot of different directions we can go here. We're running out of time, so I basically have one room for one question left. I'd love to have you back on to discuss more things, because Mike's a wealth of knowledge of different things. But I'm curious what you think of. So you came up with Adam Silver. You told me that in a separate conversation, and I'm curious what you think of how he's doing. And I know because he's obviously a very different personality than the man that hired you in David Stern, and so I know there's talk of shortening the games and some different alterations to the game here. So I'm curious what you think kind of Silver, since you have a more intimate knowledge than most on him.
Yeah, no, Adam's a great guy. Yeah, it was he came out of law school, I think, through Duke and through a firm, and we came up together in a sense, I think right around that 92, 93, and very sharp guy and a very, very hard worker, a good visionary. And actually he's got a very good sense of humor. He doesn't always show that, but I think he's done a great job. I mean, honestly, to try to step into the shoes of Stern, I mean, a lot of people, like I think Commissioner Bettman, just a lot of people left. One is just that they couldn't wait around anymore for Stern to ever retire, but also that they were just great and cherry picked and wanted their own opportunity. And Adam caught it at a great time, and I think he's doing a great job. It's a business, and so it's all about media rights, and you see what they just went through, right? I mean, incredible, the billions of dollars that media, and in particular, the services like Amazon and YouTube, et cetera, it's become sort of a different way than back when even I was there, where you had one or two channels like NBC and terrestrial, and there wasn't even cable. I mean, cable was just starting out, CNN, et cetera. So it's a totally different game in that way. But I say that because you do have to tweak the game to make it fit the media. And so therefore, too many fouls, like I said, too much three-point shooting, too much just dunk. There is a little bit, I think, of a concern of how do we make this game more interesting. Ratings are down. I mean, a normal football game on a Sunday will kill playoff ratings, even in NBA. So they do have some issues there. And so I think now that they've got some deals signed, I think there's some freedom to do some tweaks. So I think he's very creative. He's a very good leader in sense of hearing from a lot of different voices. And so I think he'll take some of those suggestions and very open to trying some things. So, yeah, I expect good things. I think the NBA is in good hands with his leadership.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I'm excited to talk with you about this more because I like the executive side of things, and it's very interesting to hear these stories. One note, well, two notes from the interview. the one in Toronto was in 1994, not 1998, and the All-Star game was 211 to 186 last year.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, what, 400 points almost? That's crazy.
Yeah. So
yeah, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something's wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, because evolution is going to make sure that that's 300 if you don't do something else with it. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about a lot more of these things with you here, Mike, when we can get you back on. But appreciate you coming on, and make sure people can find you. I know you're not in athletics anymore, but tell the people about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I unlock leadership at every level. So it's basically addressing poor workplace experiences like burnouts, fire, unproductive meetings. Those are just symptoms of poor leadership. So people can go to just my full name.net. So it's MICHAEL, Michael Wozniak, and WOZNIAK.net.
Yeah, I've seen him at work in that business, and he's very good. So definitely recommend him for anybody that's considering some of those types of services. And yeah, Mike, we'll look to have you back on here and talk about more of this kind of high value stuff as far as the overall look as opposed to the weeds. I don't like the weeds. I like this high view of everything.
I appreciate you. Keep up the good work, Ryan.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.
Yep, bye.
All right, thanks to Mike Wozniak. Great stuff on the NBA. We're going to keep the attention on basketball here, and we're going to move to the Pistons more specifically because there's been a lot going on with them too. So we'll talk to Wes Davenport of the Pistons Pindown and Motor City Hoops podcasts, and we'll get his take on the season so far. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. And attention being paid to the Lions and everything, but what I told somebody the other day that they were number 6 at the time in the playoff standings, and they were very surprised.
Yeah, no kidding. It's nice to actually have something good to talk about with the Detroit Pistons with how the past few years have been. And Ryan, thank you. Excited to be on talking some hoops with you. Definitely,
yeah. I've been excited to get you on here. We've had some of your colleagues on the show, and we like to kind of vary our coverage and get different takes. We had some stuff previewing the trade deadline. Now we get to review it, which is always fun. And we were talking about how the Pistons were in such a unique position before the trade deadline where, I mean, this is kind of unprecedented. It may have happened before where there was only one team with cap space. I can't remember a time, but that might have been possible. But obviously not with the whole apron thing because that's more recent. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting to watch this unfold and then realize, oh, wait, they got a pretty good player and then another decent player and then a couple picks for basically nothing at the trade deadline, and it was fun to watch them wheel and deal here.
Yeah, absolutely it was. I mean, Dennis Schroeder was a fantastic pickup. I think that he really addresses a need that this team had for an additional ball handler, but I think he hit the nail on the head. It was kind of watching a miracle happen as it's actually happening. The Pistons did not give up a single player on their roster to get all of this to happen. So when they bring in Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters, and a couple second-round picks, they only moved players in and out of the cap space through the other couple of moves they made to help facilitate this. So none of the names that we thought maybe would be in the trade, rumor mill, right? Like maybe Malik Beasley if you didn't want to re-sign, maybe Tim Hardaway Jr., Simone Fontecchio. Those guys are still here. The Pistons didn't lose anybody or anything. They just kind of gained a couple of players because, like you said, they were really the only team with cap space. And bonus that you're sitting at 6th or 7th in the East right now.
Yeah, we were talking about this at the beginning of the show because I had Brandon Day on from Bless You Boys for the Tigers outfit for SB Nation, and we were talking about how the Detroit teams are all kind of, obviously I'm sure they watch each other, but they're not necessarily intentionally trying to follow each other, but they're following the tried and true strategy of building through the draft, getting a young core, establishing a culture, and then layering in veterans. And that seems to be what's happening with the Pistons right now. But with pretty much every team that's done this, they all seem to be ahead of schedule, and that's what's happening with the Pistons this year. I think they might even already be ahead of some of the win totals that the sports books had them at the beginning of the year for the entire season. They're like basically at that at the time of the All-Star break here. And so it's interesting to watch because, yeah, they're a team that kept their culture, they kept their players, and you've got to think that some of these guys, like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., some of these guys will want to re-sign just like Fontecchio did and stick with this culture because this isn't a team you want to leave anymore. Maybe last year, but definitely not this year.
Absolutely. And look, it's just so fascinating to me that this team is still, when you look at the core, right, and you talk about young players drafted just like the other Detroit sports teams have done, and you kind of layer in veterans from that. Well, these young players outside of Ron Holland have been here. You know, they were here last year under Troy Weaver, under Monty Williams in the previous regime, and really, I mean, just to put it bluntly, struggled tremendously. And so to now just have it kind of turn an about face, right, where all that happened was Trajan Langdon came in and made these very minor tweaks to the roster. He added floor spacing in Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Tobias Harris to an extent. He added veteran leadership and a solid defensive coach in J.B. Bickerstaff and a couple of the other vets on the end of the bench. And all of that has really just unlocked the potential that, you know, we all saw, right, in these young players previously, but that certainly the previous regime saw as well. And so, you know, when you say that they've exceeded the expectations of Sportsbook, they have vastly exceeded even my own expectations to this point. I think when the season started, I was only projecting 25 or 26 wins, and I am so happy to be wrong because they're already here before the All-Star break.
Oh yeah, and I'm historically pretty positive about the trajectory of some of these teams, especially if they're showing something like this. They clearly were putting a good young core together. So when you saw them last year, you kind of said, okay, well, I like a lot of the players on this team, though. They just need more experience and to play together and then layer in the veterans that actually stay there, because I think that's a big advantage of retaining some of these guys, because although you do have to align the timelines of these teams, you also have to say, okay, we've got a young core, but we're going to need veterans too in order to make it further and further in the playoffs. And it seemed like every year they just realized how far away they were from doing that. So then they took the veterans that they had and then basically sold them off and said, you know, and said, okay, we're going to trade them for other pieces and then bring in other, you know, draft picks, whatever, and then try to start over. This time, they're actually seeing enough to build and use some of these veterans and then maybe kind of meld the timelines here because, yeah, you went from a lot of these guys experienced a lot of adversity, but if you get out of the adversity soon enough, then it becomes fuel for the next year. Now, hopefully, they'll be at least in the play-in, somewhere in the playoff picture this year. Then they get experience there as a younger team, and then they can keep building on that and layer people in and get these guys more experience, because a lot of this core presumably should get better. Ivy's not even there right now. Cade is continuing to get better. Thompson hasn't had, he's like just out of the reconditioning period. Duran is somehow getting bigger, which I don't know how that young man is that big already, but he's getting bigger. And so the trajectory is very good for this team. But yeah, even the most positive of us couldn't have expected this.
Oh, absolutely not. And look, I think that the type of veterans that Trajan Langdon brought in this year, it deserves a lot of credit. We recently had on the Pindown Laz Jackson join us, and I thought he made a really good point when he essentially said that back in the offseason, you know, you look at Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris, and nobody confused those guys for the saviors that, honestly, they've kind of ended up being. And it's because they were a very specific type of veteran player, right? This wasn't another Alec Burks. This wasn't another Bojan Bogdanovic, who are good players in their own right, but not necessarily perfect fits with, say, a guy like Cade Cunningham or another guard like Jaden Ivey. And for this, you know, just thinking specifically about Malik Beasley, right? What is his role on this Pistons team right now? He comes off the bench. He plays pretty consistent minutes almost every single night. And his only job is to go out there and shoot the leather off the ball and be an energy guy and an on-court leader for his teammates. That's it. And he's only 27. So that's the type of player that you can bring in, and without batting an eye, that this is a fantastic fit every single minute he plays with Cade Cunningham, a guard who has incredible court vision, a lot of scoring gravity, and is a good pick-and-roll operator. Right? You could say the same thing about Tim Hardaway Jr., who used to play off of Luka Doncic, a player that Cade Cunningham, maybe generously, but has gotten comparisons to previously. And same thing with Tobias Harris when you look at how he played off of Joel Embiid and James Harden in Philadelphia at different points. These are both very attention-centric players that he was effectively able to play off of. And you didn't have that last year or the year before with the guys that had previously been getting brought in to fill in these same types of roles. So it's credit to the new regime, the new front office, to be able to not just pick out any veteran, right? Because we've done this before, where it's any veteran that they could get with cap space. Famously, Joe Harris was a phenomenal addition, right? He didn't do all that much for the Pistons last year, but he was a vet who they used cap space to acquire, as opposed to Tim Hardaway Jr., another vet that they used cap space to acquire. So I think Langdon's eye for the right type of veteran leadership really just can't go without enough praise at this point.
Yeah, he had the right combination of strategies there, because he had, it's funny when people miss this part, because to me this is the most obvious thing about, say, a Cade Cunningham or a Luka Doncic. Yeah, we're not comparing the two directly, but their styles are fairly similar, and Cade is developing nicely. You can even throw, now people are going to think I'm comparing this guy, but throw a LeBron James into this conversation. The guys that are like that, they clearly need shooters and defenders around them. That's
Yep.
But the Lakers then try to put Rajon Rondo around LeBron, and they've kind of gone astray from that strategy a little bit. The Pistons were very clear about that strategy, but they wanted high character guys that could also spread the floor and play a little defense around Cade and give them, because the compression of that floor spacing last year was so obvious when there was nobody that was shooting well from the outside. Once Cade went into the middle, it was like everything. It was like all of a sudden he was surrounded by five guys. So the difference is very clear this year so far. So yeah, he's done a great job and turned it around quicker. I mean, he got a good coach, and he made some player acquisitions. But yeah, they're definitely ahead of schedule. So I want to pick up there, and I want to talk about some of the coaching aspects of it too here with Wes. But he's given us some great stuff so far. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.